This is Mildred Nitzberg, continuing with part 2 of an interview of Arnold Che on March 7th. This is tape number 6. Arnold, is there any other single incident in your camp experiences that you feel you would like to share with us that had a special made a special mark?
I have one incident that, except my wife, nobody in the whole world knew about it. I think a few girls in the camp knew about it, otherwise nobody, not even my children. When I wrote my book, I have a friend in New Haven, Connecticut, who is a psychiatrist, a son of a survivor. And we were talking once about it, since he interviews a lot of survivors. And he said, Arnold, if there is anything that you're going to put in that book, you have to put it in the book. And after I discussed it with my wife, she said, I don't mind. To me, it was the most embarrassing act that I ever did in the camp. And I was very embarrassed of it, and that's why I never talked about it. It was one night in 1944 when this murderer, Kurbanik, came in with a group of SS women. And I think it's worthwhile to mention that the women in the SS were much worse than the men, much worse. They were plain and simple animals. And he brought in that time a group of SS women, showed them around the camp. And she looked at different prisoners, and we were standing all in front of them naked. And it was quite embarrassing. We were used to stay naked, you know, in front of the assessment for selections and whatnot. But this was quite embarrassing for us. A group of young SS women dressed to kill in their uniforms, and they all looked beautiful in their uniforms. But all I know is that that same night that Kurbani came in, and he calls up my number. We were never called by name. And calls up my number. And he said, I want to see you. I knew if Kurbani calls you, this is kaput. And I went out. And he said, I need you. You're coming over with me to fix a stove in the women's camp. And he took me to the women's camp. I think it's worthwhile to mention it here, that I mentioned it in my book on advice of the psychiatrist, primarily because he said that a lot is written about how men were used for the SS or for others to satisfy their homosexual desires. And he said this has to be told too. I was that time 20 years old. And that night he came in, he said, you're coming with me. And I go with him. He had the motorcycle, and I sat in that, whatever you call it, the sidecar of the motorcycle. Took me over to the women's camp, he reports, and everything is fine. And I go to the women's camp, and I thought we're going into the kitchen. At the end of the camp, I can't even describe the little house because I was too shook up. The end of it was in the middle of the night. At the end of the camp was a small, like a guard house. And I came in here and I noticed Lisa, an SS woman that was the terror of the camp. And Lisa was in her uniform, and Kurbani came in and he salutes for her. She must have been a higher rank than him. But young, maybe 22 years of age. Beautiful, beautiful woman with long blonde braids hanging out underneath the SS cap. And he said, this is Arnold, this is Lisa. And they were talking something that I didn't hear, and he said, well, I'll be back in about 2 hours. I hope you'll forgive me that I won't go into details because it's too embarrassing. But that night made me take a shower, She served food on the table, and she just said, "You're going to sleep here at night." Little did I know that this was the first of many trips that I will have to make to her. She wasn't too happy with my physical looks because I was skinny of a kind, not as skinny as I was with the liberation. But she said it will do. I remember the second time when I was brought over to her, and everything was in the middle of the night, and the next day I was exempt from work. I didn't have to go to work because Lisa may need me again. And the next time when I came over there, we got a little bit more acquainted. So I said, "Lisa, you know you can be shot," which is true. She could be shot for the same thing, because it was Rassenschande, a disgrace for their race, you know, to have anything to do with the Jew. I said, "Lisa, here you forcing a man to make love to you, that you a slave. In your eyes, I am a criminal." I said, "How can you do this?" She said, "Well, I don't care how I get them." And in the same breath, she said, "If you won't satisfy me," she said, "I can kill you in your..." Yet it brought it out, forgive me, I'm jumping it. It brought it out when I said, "You're making love to a Jew, and next morning you'll go out on the camp and kill 12 Jews." She said, "Oh, if you won't satisfy me, you will die in this bed." To me, it was the greatest embarrassment, because in the morning, when they picked me up and I left, I saw girls looking at me from the camp, and they probably thought, "Look at this. A Jew is going in making love to a German woman just to survive." And this was, to me, the lowest form of survival.
It was hard for you to live with.
Little did they know that I just had to do it.
Of course, there was no place for questioning.
I couldn't question it. These people, now I know they understand, because I met one girl that brought it up, not in full, you know, but she brought it up that she knows that I lived with a Nazi woman over there in the camp. But it wasn't just this. When I would leave, she would ask me, "Do you want me to do anything for the Jewish Huas?" Because she knew that I have a lot of friends in the camp from my hometown. I said, "Yes. I wish you could give them something to eat, something more." And she would take out every day a few girls and just give them an extra piece of bread or give them an extra soup.
So that helped you to live through that experience, knowing that in its way it helped other people.
She told me what she did. The next night, if I would come, she would tell me what she did. But it still didn't help me. It was a very low way of buying a life. But it seems that my desire to live was stronger than my principles.
Except that if the Jews didn't have that great desire to live, Arnold, we might not have survived as a people.
But it was
we might not have survived.
It was a low form.
It was hard
wanting to live. Yeah, it was too high a price.
You're judging yourself too harshly. You helped other people somehow through that act, and that's what you have to think of.
I tried.
You did.
It was just, yeah.
You did, and you used it to help other people. Those were very hard times, and there's no way to go back into those times. Even for you, as you look back at it, those are times that are really incomprehensible, even to you.
Oh yes, even to me. Most of the time, I just can't figure out, how we could survive under such conditions.
The things that were demanded of you. But you did survive and went on to tell the story. And you do other things today. You survived and you spent all these years telling the world, and that's a painful thing to do, and yet you've continued to do it all these years.
This was
all
a promise
these years.
that I made myself, never to forget and never let anybody else forget.
You certainly have fulfilled the promise. I know it.
This picture is me at the liberation. It was taken about May or the beginning of June 1945, right after the liberation. This is my first book that came out in 1983, the first book that I started to write. Yeah, there was a kind that I really don't like to talk about it, but there was, they said that the German SS used German women for their pleasure. The German SS women, which were worse than the SS men, used boys too. Every night they would call in another boy just to have their pleasures.
An inmate?
An inmate. And I'm embarrassed to say it, but I was one of those too. And that time, I thought it only happened on our group. But later on, after my book, my first book that came out in '83, was out, I found out that other people were used to. As a matter of fact, I know two brothers that live in New York now, from my hometown. They were both used by SS women. But that SS woman that I was used by was the most vicious, the most beautiful woman, but the most vicious one in the camp. To her to kill a few people was just a pleasure, just a sheer pleasure. Just about these incidents, I could go on 2-3 tapes. I'd rather not.
She called on you more than once?
She just told, she called a couple times. I mean, she just told an assessment, bring in this and this kid. She didn't know my name or what.
She saw you there?
She saw me. I came in to do some work there. And she saw me and she said, bring in that kid. And she was the most vicious, cruelest person I ever came across.
What did she do?
She could just go out Sunday afternoon with 2 guns and shoot any girl on the women camp, any girl that came across her. It was a pleasure. They were vicious, the SS, but the women were the worst. The SS.